one. They work really well. I also recommend you have 2 paintbrushes. I have one paintbrush that I use for painting. It's very important that it's a round brush. These brushes have a thicker body, but they come to a very nice point. That helps you, the thicker body helps you hold more paint, and the tip helps you get nice fine lines. I also recommend that you have a second brush, an older brush, maybe one that's not as doesn't have as fine of a point, for getting paint out of a pot, mixing it on the palette. If you don't have an extra brush or an older brush, you can also just use the end of your paintbrush. Essentially, you don't want to be messing up your paintbrush if you don't need to. Another important point for your nice brushes is you want to keep the paint in the top third of the brush. If it gets into the ferrule, which is this part here, where it connects, where the bristles connect to the metal part, it'll split your brush and you won't get this nice fine point anymore. So you want to keep it in the top third of the brush, you want a round brush, and you should be using either the end of the brush or a second, older, less fine tipped brush to get paint out of the pots. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is what the correct consistency of paint looks like. So we'll pick a color, and I'll just get going. We're going to start, might as well start with blue. So we have here a base paint, Kantor Blue. Make sure you shake it up. Okay, you have your mixing brush, get some paint, put it on your palette. It looks something like that. Okay, now here I have some extra square bases that I'm not using that I've primed so that you can see the difference between the thicknesses of paint. So here we have just the paint with the base thickness. Okay, and you should be able to see that at the edges here you can see a distinct thick line. Okay, that's because our paint is too thick, so when you push it down it kind of pools up around your brush and gives you these lines. These lines will show up on your model because of how small the normal details are. This will add a weird texture to your model that you don't want. So what we do is we take our mixing brush, or the end of our nice brush, and we add some water, and we just mix it in. Now some people say that you want the consistency to be like skim milk. I don't drink milk, so I can't tell you if that's true or not. I usually just test the paint before I use it. You can see actually on my thumb here, I test paint a lot. This is to make sure that your paint is not too thick or too thin. And so here's what paint that's been diluted looks like. You can see that it's not as opaque. It's also not as wide, so the paint follows the shape of your brush better. It doesn't have the same texture on the outer edges. So this is a properly diluted paint that is won't get you any weird textures, and it will apply nicely. So the way to get the same opacity as the first one is to just paint another layer. You can see as we are painting layers, it's getting more opaque, but we aren't getting that same, the gross texture. Now, what happens if our paint is too diluted? I'll add another scoop of water here. And another one. Alright. So when it's too diluted, it'll start to look like this. Now, there are certain applications where you want paint like this, but for base coats or layers, this is too diluted. And one way you can tell is too diluted is you can see that the pigments are like moving around. They will do this on your model. And so you'll get areas that are very pigmented or not pigmented enough, just based on gravity. You can also see there is lighter paint, and then at the edge there's like a defined line. That is because the water has broken down the structure of the paint, and pigments have collected on the edge of the puddle. So you don't want that. Again, that these lines show up on your mini, and you have to work to get rid of them, which is unfortunate. So we have, again, too thick, correct consistency, too thin. And I would, again, test these on like your thumb or on the palette before applying them to your miniature, because my thumb, I can wash the paint off, no big deal. Palette, I can wash the paint off, no big deal. The model, it's much harder to remove paint from. So next we can talk about actually painting on a miniature. This is a miniature that I received for free from Games Workshop. They will have miniatures like this at their stores that you can go and they'll teach you the painting basics, and you can paint along with them. But this one I primed black, and I recommend priming them black as a starting color, because if you miss a spot or there's a spot you can't reach with your brush, especially like in our armpits, behind the backpack, some of the places that are harder to reach, if you don't get paint on those, they will stay black, and black will likely be your shadow color, so it's less noticeable. If you prime them like light gray or white, and there's a spot you can't reach, that white will be very noticeable, and it will impact how your miniature looks. It's also very good practice to have them be primed black, because you work on creating smooth, thin layers that you build up color, which is the most basic technique in miniature painting that you want to get good at. Thin, smooth layers that you build on top of each other. So we'll go back to our Kantor Blue and add this paint to our palette. Okay. Now again, you can see kind of a more physical representation of how it looks on the palette. The too thick, where it holds its shape, the correct consistency, and then too thin, where you can see even on the palette the pigment is separating from the paint. So we will thin our paint down, and this is kind of a lot. Might not have needed this much, but we'll thin it down to the correct consistency here. Okay, and then we'll go to our brush. Another reason you might want a less precise brush is for base coating. Using your precise brush for base coating isn't always the best idea because just by using your brush, the bristles will begin to splay out. You'll get a less fine point, and that's not what you want. You want to keep your nice brushes nice. So I'll be using this thicker brush that I used for getting paint out of the palette because I don't need to be as precise. Now again, we'll just be painting nice thin layers on our miniature. And another reason that you want the paint to be this dilution is it flows into the cracks better. So while I'm moving across this model, there's a lot of detail on this model, and the thicker paint will not flow into the crevices, and you'll actually have a harder time getting an even base coat. And so when the goal is to get a nice even base coat, the thicker paint actually is harder to get an even base coat with. So you can see after one coat, you can still see the black coming through. That's because our paint is fairly diluted, which is okay. We will just come back later. And the nice thing about this paint is it dries fairly quickly. So by the time we get back to that part of the model, it'll be dry. Now, in this step, you don't have to be too precise. However, don't intentionally get paint on places that are not going to be blue, or the color you're working with. So like the belt here, this pouch, I'm not going to intentionally paint, but if you get paint on it, don't worry. The paint is thin, and we've thinned it even more, so it won't destroy your model to have a little extra paint on it. So you can see, even after just painting the other leg, this leg is fairly dry. So we'll keep going. Another important thing is that you want to be constantly taking the paint off your brush. The rule of thumb I like to use is if I'm getting more paint from my palette, I can also get the paint off my brush, get the extra paint off my brush. You want to do this because when the paint dries in the brush, it destroys the brush. It becomes less precise. The bristles splay out, And so you want to get that, you want to make sure that no paint is drying in your brush. And again, this insignia on his chest, it won't be blue. However, I'm not worried about getting blue on it because it's more important that I get blue all the way around the insignia. Because after painting the insignia, you will notice that if you didn't get blue all the way around all the edges of the insignia, you will notice that after painting the insignia, and it'll look bad. So it's more important to get coverage on all the parts that are blue, as opposed to avoiding painting that area because you don't want to get paint on something that won't be blue. The paint is, like I said, very thin, and so it will not destroy your model to get a little bit extra paint on some areas. Now, this is another good example of why I like to paint or spray paint black. You can see it's very hard for me to get my brush into this area on the backpack. Luckily, it's black, so if I don't paint it, no one will really notice. It'll just look like it's in shadow, and hey, it's in a deep crevice on the model, so it should probably be in shadow anyway. Alright, I think I've gotten a good base coat on most of the model. I can come back to the start. You can see what one base coat looks like. This second base coat will just bring out more of the blue. Because we put it over black and it's somewhat transparent, our end result was mostly just a darker shade of our base coat color. And you can leave it like that if you want, but I want this base color to be the color of my armor, and so I'll do another layer just to make sure it's a strong blue color. All over the model's armor. All right. The next step is to let this base coat dry fully. And you really want to make sure that you wait for this base coat to dry fully before moving on. And that's because if the paint is semi-dry, you will get something called tearing. And that's where, as you're painting the next layer, you will pull up some of your previous layer. Tears are really hard to fix. because it's not only paint that you're pulling up, but you're pulling up layers, and that creates a texture on your model that is hard to get rid of. So you want to make sure that you're not destroying any of the work we just did, and we're not creating any tears that can create unwanted textures on our model. And so we will just wait for this to fully dry, and that way we don't have to worry about pulling up any paint. Alright, so the next step is to use a shade. Now, the shades are important because they flow into all the cracks and crevices and give you a nice outline for the details on your model. If you're going to get a shade, I highly recommend using Nuln oil. It's black, so that's good as a default shadow color. I have these holders that are 3D printed that are good because these paints easily tip over and spill. One way to get around that, even if you don't have something to hold the paint, is just to bring it out onto your palette. Now, I forgot to click record for the rest of the model that I already applied the shade to, but you can see that the difference in color between these two legs, it mutes the colors a bit, but also it frames the details better. So you can see here it's darker, and like these vents on the leg, you can see them better. This part right here, there's not one on the other side, but again, it's better detailed. You can also see that you get an interesting gradient where like the top of the leg is brighter than the bottom of the leg. You can get some pretty cool effects with, you can see here, it outlines the shoulder pad. So in general, you get a pretty nice effect with the shade. The way you apply it is you just load up your brush. I'm using my less detailed brush, and you just put it over the whole mini, making sure it doesn't pool too much in any area. I'm actually going to get some more here. Now, it's pretty quick to apply, but it does take a bit to dry. So if you do notice it pooling, you can quickly get to it. And so that you just rinse off your brush and dab up the extra paint. Okay. And this will get you the desired effect. Okay. This is another place where batch painting comes in handy, because you don't have to spend all the time waiting for it to dry. You can just move on to the next model. All right. So the next step, because we've introduced the shade, and it's a more the shade is a more muted color, we can actually come back in with the base color to bring back some of our original color. And so the way we do that is we use our detail brush instead of our harder brush, and we avoid the cracks that we want the wash to go in, but we apply our paint in nice thin smooth layers, and that'll bring back our vibrant blue, but maintaining our shadows. Now, you might be wondering why we chose to apply the wash if we were to the whole model, if we were just going to paint back over it with our base color. And the answer to that is the wash applies best when applied to the whole surface as opposed to just the crevices. If you apply it to just the crevices, you can get a weird coffee staining effect sometimes that does not look good. Also, if we apply the base coat, then apply the shade, then apply the base coat again, our crevices will be a combination of our base coat and the shade, as opposed to black. So the shades will look more consistent with the rest of the model because they contain some of the base coat's color. Right? The shade does not fully cover the base coat's color, and so our shadows are dark blue as opposed to black, and that generally looks a bit more realistic, as shadows in the real world are not black, they are just darker versions of the color that the shadow's on. And so you can see I'm again bracing my paintbrush hand on the miniature, and this allows me to get nice consistent brush strokes where I can avoid the crevices pretty easily. It will take some practice, of course, but this is a more consistent way to paint. The one issue is that you have to make sure you're not sticking your finger in wet paint. You don't want your fingerprint to show up on the model. Now, if you've noticed, I haven't painted the underside of the arms, and this is something that you can do that gets you a nice, it's a nice simple highlight, is because if your light source is from above, like, you know, the sun, the undersides of your arms will be in shadow. And so by applying the wash to the whole model and then only applying our base color back to places like that are upward facing, we can get a simple highlight for free. I mean, not for free, we did the work, but it's a lot easier than building up the color yourself. And like I said before, with the crevices that are dark blue instead of black, the underside of the arm will be dark blue instead of black, which is more fitting than and more realistic. So now that we've added our base color back, you can see that we still have dark crevices that, you know, kind of showcase the model's detail. The next way we can showcase the model's detail is by coming in with a highlight color. Now, I don't know if this is the proper color for ultramarines, but this is a layer paint. Now, if the difference between layer paints and base paints is that the base paints usually cover better, are a bit thicker, and so you don't have to add as much water to the base paints, I mean to the layer paints as opposed to the base paints, but you still want to dilute them, because the properly diluted paints will it'll blend better if you have them more diluted. So you can see what it looks like to apply a layer paint over a base paint. You can see the base color plus the layer color, and then just the layer color. This transitional color, where you can see the base paint through the layer, is what we're looking for. This will give us smoother transitions. So another important fact is that the direction that you pull the brush, at the end where you pick your brush up, is where the most pigment will be. I don't know if you can really see it, but you can see that there's more pigment here at the end than at the start. So in that case, you always want to draw your brush in the direction of the highlight. So for example, if I'm working on this, if I'm working on the shoulder pad and I want the top of the shoulder pad to be brighter than the bottom, I will start at the bottom and drop up to the top. And we'll just draw nice thin lines here. Again, avoiding the cracks and crevices. And now, when that dries, this will be, the shoulder pad will be brighter than the rest of the model. Now, you don't have to, because the layer paints are thinner, You will need more layers to get full coverage. You can see it's pretty spotty coverage right now. So we can go on to other parts of the model that we want to highlight here. Again, pulling the paint in the direction of the highlight. If it doesn't matter, then don't worry about it, but sometimes it does matter. And generally, we just want to highlight the upward-facing panels. Another thing that we can do is we can do what's called an I'll come back here to get a more consistent layer here. So you can see how applying a highlight color further emphasizes the detail, which is what we want. Generally, this is a desired effect. In this case, I may have chosen a color that's too bright, but that's okay. So you can start to see the gradient take effect. And it can be a pretty cool effect. Another technique is called edge highlighting. And this is where you focus your brush on the edge. Now the reason I pulled down instead of up here is because as the armor plate travels up, it actually travels more under the arm. So actually the top of this armor plate will be in more shadow than the bottom of the armor plate. So, oops. That's why I'm pulling down with this layer, and so the highlight, it gets brighter as you go down the armor panel. Now one thing you'll notice is that every time I add a layer, I am applying the paint to less of the armor panel. This will help us get this gradient because the first layer is a combination of the layer paint and the base paint underneath. But as you add more layers, it starts to look more and more like the layer paint and less like the base paint. So if you go in increasingly smaller areas as you add those additional layers, you will get a gradient effect. So you can see as it goes from the darker blue that is the shade plus the base layer, then we get the base layer, then we get the base layer plus the layer paint, then we get just the layer paint at the top. And you can see a similar thing on the side panel, where we start at dark blue, then we go to the blue, and then we get lighter blue as we go down, until we end up with just the layer paint color. And that's it for the basics of miniature painting.